Keep in front. Closer. I'm sorry. If human evolution were left in the hands of humanity and nature, no great leap would be possible. Because in the human consciousness, there is not enough strength, capacity, wisdom to be able to make the breakthrough necessary. Nature herself is struggling against her own limitations, And therefore, at every critical transition point in history, there has to be a help from above and a special divine emanation enters in the human consciousness to lift it up, even to lift up nature, to make possible the change. But there are many kinds of change, many kinds of transitions, some which are local for a community, for a culture, for a nation, some which may act globally but may involve only a shift or a partial transition or a correction of a direction, a new awakening of some possibility, a new movement initiated. Once in a while, there are the great transitions where the whole direction of human evolution is changed, or a new consciousness not so far present on earth must now be established and awakened in human evolution. The transition from the ape to the human was one such. In the human species, subsequently, there have been further gradations of this kind where a new consciousness was to be established. Sri Rama was an avatar to establish on earth the sattvic mind, to set in human life the higher sattvic standards, to awaken in the human mind the higher sattvic ideals, and to give human evolution an impetus in that direction. A push and a direction set perhaps 9,000 years ago, which is still impacting the values of human society all over the earth. Sri Krishna established on earth the over-mental consciousness, the consciousness and the principle of Ananda, and the result of that is still impacting the human consciousness and the possibilities of the heart and the relationship with the divine through love. And so the work of the avatar is not only for humanity, but for a time ahead, an entire age and era is defined, and a direction set for in-evolution. Necessarily, when the time comes for the supramental consciousness to be established in humanity, a similar avatarhood becomes necessary. The role of the avatar is to take on the human body with all the difficulties of the human consciousness and human nature, struggle through them to hew a way out and awaken in that human substance this new higher consciousness and establish it, not only in his individual body, but through his contact in the human consciousness with the whole humanity, to establish it in humanity. It does not mean everybody feels its impact immediately. In the time of Sri Krishna, not everybody knew or accepted his divinity or understood the nature of the work that he had come to do. And yet, the work was done. The avatar, therefore, takes upon himself the burden of human nature on the scale of humanity. That means all problems of human nature in humanity, in their most extreme, have to be fought within himself and overcome. But that's not all. The new consciousness has to be established through him in humanity. And so it is we find in the work of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, this task. In the early stage of Sri Aurobindo's yoga, when he formally began the yoga, it was to begin to get power for freeing India. And then very quickly, Sri Krishna awakened in him the recognition of the larger work necessary for humanity, and then necessary for the divine. And subsequently, he was led to take an isolated period of sadhana in Pondicherry, where within the span of 5 years, we find in his personal diary notes the whole passage of ascent into the supramental consciousness and the work of establishing it in his mind, in his life energies, and even in his physical consciousness. In 1914, it had reached a point of stability, after which that was a time when the mother came and joined him in the work, and subsequently a small group of disciples gathered around him. Some of the descriptions of their time with Sri Aurobindo are extraordinary. One of them, by the name of Kodandaraman, I wish we had his little book of reminiscences here. It is worth reading. He describes how they would go to Sri Aurobindo every evening for a meditation for an hour. And during that time, it was as if layer by layer, all the higher states of consciousness were being established in them. And the rest of the day, they had only to maintain themselves open to him, and they were allowed to do pretty much whatever they wanted. Some would play football, some would read, some would go for a walk. They had nothing much to do other than basic maintenance. And he says, after a while, within a few weeks, he had reached such a state that the ranges of the higher consciousness and the over-mental experiences were open to him, and the Vedic experiences were beginning to unfold in his consciousness. Afterwards, he left after 2 years, went back to his family for various reasons, and the experiences diminished and faded away. But of course, he was changed for life. He was never the same after. Subsequently, in 1926, the ashram was formally established when the overmental consciousness was founded in Sri Aurobindo's body. The mother observes how in the days before that event, she saw Sri Krishna hovering above Sri Aurobindo, and then one day she saw him descend and merge in Sri Aurobindo's body. It was the establishment in the physical consciousness of the Krishna consciousness of the overmental plane. A precursor now to the supramental consciousness being brought in the physical body. Until it is established in the physical consciousness, it remains as it is, as a cosmic principle, but is not operational and active in human physical evolution. And so this was the work that they had to accomplish. Based on this consciousness, of course, a community could be formed, and that's when the Sri Aurobindo Ashram formally as a community was declared. I give this background so that we understand the event of 1956 and how momentous it is for human evolution. A point came in 1938 when the whole supramental consciousness was pressing on the collectivity, and the intention there was to form a small collective group which could receive that supramental consciousness, hold it in a collective frame, and gradually allow its formation and manifestation in human life. And in 1938, a stage was reached, and the people of that period describe how it was as if there was delight, ananda in the air, and everything was as if opening to something new which has never been felt before. And there was the promise of fulfillment and realization. It was at that point, the mother observes, that the Second World War began. And she links it to this, because she said the supramental manifestation was imminent. And the only way the Asuric forces could delay it was to create such a great crisis that their energies would be directed to protecting humanity first. And so the Second World War was started by them for this purpose. And one of the side effects of the Second World War was a large influx of refugees in the ashram, which caused a huge dilution in the atmosphere, and the collective frame for holding the supramental consciousness was no more capable of doing it in the way it was intended originally. And Mother says it was nature that made a choice. There was a possibility of a small group rising very high to receive and to bring down this consciousness, or there was a possibility of a larger mixed group in which gradually something of the higher consciousness would descend and organize itself. And while they were working on the first possibility, with the influx of refugees, Mother says, nature chose the second option. And the result, of course, was a postponement of the larger fulfillment. But she says many other problems which would have to be dealt with later were now being dealt with sooner. There's always a give and take and a way of looking at it that one sees things in a positive light. But the outcome of that was the attempt to create that community was delayed and diluted. Sri Aurobindo still made one more attempt in 1947 when India became free. He asked for Pondicherry not to be merged into India. It's not a well-known fact. Many thought it was because he hated the British or he was upset that they had caused him so much trouble. It had nothing to do with that. He had worked out, he had of course already described in an earlier communication in the 1930s of the great danger India would have to pass through even after freedom. Partition itself, which he tried to prevent. But even after, he says, Bolshevism or Gunda Raj, things look ominous. What India will do with her freedom, he says, that's the bigger problem. And of course, we saw both Bolshevism and Gunda Raj. So to protect the higher possibility, he asked for Pondicherry to remain separate still and had worked out a scheme with the French government to make Pondicherry an university township. Sri Aurobindo himself agreed to be the head of this university as director of the university and worked out a scheme and a framework for the development of this. It would be an isolated focal point where something different would be developed, a higher possibility through education and even a higher form of education. The project moved reasonably fast, and then some of the politicians in Pondicherry, which was still under French rule, they took advantage of this to play politics, and Sri Aurobindo withdrew his sanction to the project, withdrew his position as director, and soon after he left his body. And the mother subsequently worked to bring Pondicherry back in the Indian Union, and as you know, that whole process was completed, I think, 1955. This is just a background to show you the efforts which were going on. And finally, a stage had been reached where they had to take a different strategy. Either one of them, the mother or Sri Aurobindo, would have to go on the other side, leave the body and form a bridge linking the highest to the material domain to bring down the supramental consciousness. And Sri Aurobindo said to the mother that your body is better suited, it is more plastic. Your body is better suited for the transformation, and he chose to leave to form this bridge, which working from the other side and the mother working from below, to form the link which would make possible the supramental manifestation on earth. This was finally completed in 1956, and as if anticipating this outcome, the mother gave a message in the first of the year. If I recall right, the manifestation of a new world is not announced by the beat of drums. And it was a sense of things to come. the event itself takes place not by a human plan, but by divine action involving a divine sanction. And the mother subsequently noted in her diary, and a month after the event, this was released to the public. And the message I would like to read out because it carries a lot of profound suggestions in the description. Dated 29th February 1956, during the common meditation on Wednesday. Now, this was after the class that the mother had with the students. There was a meditation following that, and the event took place during the meditation. And the mother said that she expected at the end of it that because of the downpour of the supramental consciousness, people would be flat, stunned by the intensity of the impact. But she said when the downpour came, people were so unconscious, nobody even felt it. Nobody understood that something so momentous happened. She found people getting up, rolling their hands, and walking off. And that's why she waited for a while before releasing the message. And this is what she wrote. This evening, the divine presence, concrete and material, was there present amongst you. I had a form of living gold, bigger than the universe. And I was facing a huge and massive golden door which separated the world from the divine. As I looked at the door, I knew and willed in a single movement of consciousness that the time has come. And lifting with both hands a mighty golden hammer, I struck one blow, one single blow on the door, and the door was shattered to pieces. Then the supramental light and force and consciousness rushed down upon earth in an uninterrupted flow. And that is all, the message. But in this message, there's some very important indications that I would like to dwell upon. The decision, the action itself is done by the divine presence, concrete and material present. And then she says, as the instrument, as a Shakti of the divine, I had the form of living gold bigger than the universe. Now this whole description, remember, is taking place in a domain of consciousness, which is between the world, manifest world, and the supramental consciousness, on the edge, on the border. And this is in the domain of the overmental and the peaks of the overmental, where everything is cosmic, gigantic. And cosmic is not just universe, it is bigger than the universe. The cosmos can hold an infinity of the universes. And so she stands there in that cosmic form, bigger than the universe, a form of living gold, because the substance itself is now of that nature, of the consciousness which you are meeting. When you enter the vital world, you can only interact with the vital world in a body made of vital substance. When you explore the mental worlds, you can only interact with the mental worlds in a body made of mental substance. Just as you can only interact with the physical objects through a body made of physical substance. And when you enter this domain of the overmental and supramental, your body has to be of that substance, form of living gold, bigger than the universe. Because what is being done is for the universe, and therefore the one who does the action is necessarily greater, larger than the universe. And I was facing a huge and massive golden door which separated the world from the divine. What is this door separating the world from the divine? And why is this door in front of the supramental consciousness? And why does breaking it release the supramental consciousness? And for this, very briefly, we have to look at a text from the Veda. And that's why you see yesterday's discussion is so important. In the text of the Isha Upanishad, verse number 15 goes like this. Let's just read the translation. The face of truth is covered with a brilliant golden lid. That thou remove, O fosterer. Fosterer is translation of Pushan, strength, who is the increaser of light. That is one of the aspects of the golden sun. That thou remove, O fosterer, for the law of truth, for sight. Satya dharmaya, truth law, for sake of truth law, is a literal translation. Drishtaye, for sight, for revelation. And the face of truth, Satyasya mukham, face of truth. For those who follow the Sanskrit way, because in the Sanskrit there are resonances which are interesting. Hiranmayena patrena, patra, vessel, Hiranmaya, golden vessel, golden lid covers the face of truth. And he invokes the sun in the aspect of Pushan, the supramental sun again, to remove this. So who can remove that golden lid? That which is covered by the golden lid, the supramental sun, the supramental truth, which is organizing and manifesting this whole universe, is covered with this golden lid. You emerging from below cannot do it. You can ask him to remove it. It's not in your domain, it is beyond your capacity to remove that. What this golden lid is can be understood on two levels. There is a first experience of a screen that separates us from the divine. And this is the activity of the mind, the agitated activity that we discussed yesterday. When the light, the straight light from the sun enters the domain of mind, it gets broken up and fragmented. And it creates a brilliant layer of light. Even the higher activities of the mind are in this brilliant layer of light. And when you look up, you see this bright light, but you cannot see beyond because it conceals. Even as it reveals by fragmentation of light, it conceals something greater. Now you see, the symbol is so powerful in nature. In all of nature's processes, she is reflecting higher truths and organizing them in lower forms. When you look at the daylight, the sun, light, is scattered by the sky. So when you look up, the sky is like a gigantic bowl of light, lid of light covering, and you cannot see through. It lights up the world, like the mind lights up our life and leads it through rational values. And so you look at the world with the light that the sky scatters and you say, oh, this is good. But you do not realize that the sky conceals the so much more, the infinity beyond. And it is only at night when the sun has set that you see through to the infinity of the stars and the eternity of the stars. And so our mind's activity is similarly preventing us from opening out to the infinity and the eternity of the consciousness above mind. So this is first layer on which we can recognize this golden lid. There is golden lid, and the mind consciousness is not golden really. So it's a hint that there's something higher still. And of this, Sri Aurobindo writes in The Life Divine, he explains that as you ascend higher into the overmental consciousness, and you remember this is the domain of the cosmic consciousness, where every aspect of the cosmos takes up its own world, creates its own reality, complete, entire, a whole universe based on an aspect, on a power, on a perspective of the one. And they can enter in conflict also, remember. But as you ascend up towards the unification of all these aspects, at the peak of the overmental consciousness is a point where everything seems to unite into the unity, but still the division presides as the principle. A unity in division. And it is so similar to the supramental which is above in the pure unity undivided. It is so similar that one can stop there and say, you have reached it. And it is here that we experience the golden lid in its highest station. It is a consciousness so similar to the supramental that you could stop and say, this is it, but it is actually the beginning of the fragmentation. And therefore, it has the tiniest grain of the principle of ignorance, which then flowers to become the massive ignorance that is in the lower levels of the universe in manifestation. But the division begins there, just at that point. And this is the golden lid, which covers the face of the truth, the pure supramental consciousness, the sun. And it is this which needs to be broken, shattered. Now, this can be experienced on an individual level in the way that you have descriptions of the Vedic rishis ascending to this and then breaking through. Crossing the gates of the sun is one of the descriptions. But this has to be done for humanity, for the universe. And it is this which he is describing as the gate, the gigantic gate. And let's just read a little bit more from the Isha. What happens when this lid is shattered, when you ask for the lid to be removed? The next verse, verse 16, O fosterer, O soul seer, O ordainer, O illumining sun, O power of the Father of creatures, marshal thy rays, draw together thy light, the luster which is thy most blessed form of all. That in thee I behold, the Purusha there and there, he am I. Part of this verse I had mentioned yesterday also. There is this marshalling of all the rays, and all the fragmented rays of light are brought together and aligned and brought into the unity. And the result is you see the highest status of the divine consciousness and its effect in the Rishi, the Purusha there and there, he am I. In Sanskrit, Yosa Vasau Purusha, whoever is the person everywhere, Sohamasmi, he am I. One awakens into that consciousness of unity, seeing one's self in all things, in all beings. So we go back now to the text of the mother's description. I was facing a huge and massive golden door which separated the world from the divine. As I looked at the door, I knew and willed in a single movement of consciousness. Knew and willed. Knowledge and will uniting in a single movement is not possible in the human consciousness. You know, and then you can will. But the part which wills and the part which knows are different. And therefore there's always a conflict. Although I know what I should do, I'm unable to act. Or the will moves by an instinct. I find myself doing something although I know I should not do it. The division of will and knowledge is throughout the divided consciousness. It is only as you ascend into the supramental consciousness that knowledge will unite to become a single movement. What you know is what you are, is what you become, and the willing is a spontaneous outcome of the knowledge. It is knowledge moving as force of action. It is force that is the knowledge, and that only exists in the supramental consciousness. And it is in this condition that I knew and willed in a single movement of consciousness that the time has come. And lifting with both hands a mighty golden hammer, also symbolic, the two hands representing two different aspects of our consciousness. I struck one blow, one single blow on the door, and the door was shattered to pieces. The result is the consciousness above pours down, the supramental light, force, and consciousness, rushed down upon earth in an uninterrupted flow. And this, remember, as a consciousness, it is a consciousness of infinity, of eternity, of omniscience, of omnipotence. And as it pours down in this way, it's like an ocean, a tsunami rushing upon the earth. What would happen? You would expect things to shatter. And when she opened her eyes, she expected people to be lying flat from the impact. But she said, the dullness of human nature is so great that it did not even register. And she explains in some other conversations later that unless one has developed in oneself something which can recognize those ranges of consciousness, one would never know it. It's like when people speak of the psychic being, the psychic presence within us, the soul, you don't really know it unless you can enter into its purity of vibration. Mostly, what people think is the psychic is some kind of a devotion, some kind of an emotional sensitivity or sweetness. That's not psychic. There's something much more profound, much more subtle, and you cannot know it unless you become like it. And so it is for all the high ranges of consciousness. So it is for anything. And so she said, unless you have cultivated that sensitivity, either through the psychic contact or by opening to the high ranges of consciousness, there's nothing in you which would resonate to its action. And interestingly, she made a comment. There were 4 people on earth who felt the impact of this. Now, how did she come up with this number? In her consciousness, remember, she's holding the whole of humanity and she senses 4 people. And she says, one of them was in Africa. Because she didn't have a name, she just knew the Africa. And I wanted to read that to you. I had asked for it to be scanned and sent, but what came, unfortunately, is half of the narration. The second half, which was most important, I may not be able to read to you, but I will tell it to you as I remember it. So this devotee was Indu Bhai Patel, the Gujarati businessman working in Kenya, in Mombasa. He was a devotee, he was in touch with the ashram, and he had obviously something which had this sensitivity to be able to feel things. So he writes 2 incidents which took place. One was before the 29th of February. He says he was interested in astrology, he was carrying an ephemeris, and he looked at Sri Aurobindo's chart and found a particular combination which was significant, which would last for 1 full month. And he felt intuitively that it would be an event equal in importance for the ashram to that of the November 24th, 1926. But what would be the date, he asks. I've skipped the details, now I get to the real stuff. It occurred to me that Sri Aurobindo's map would indicate it. The map, I think he means in the chart, there is a particular sequence which is called there's an unfolding of patterns of influences. That's the map, I think. It showed Pluto conjunct with Mars in Cancer 10 degrees, the exact Jupiter trine. So the third point to complete the trine would be Pisces 10 degrees. I asked myself, what would be the date for the sun at this point? I looked into the ephemeris and found the answer, February 29. Very interesting. You see, he was an astrologer, quite an extraordinary astrologer. But the truth of astrology is not so much the combinations and patterns of planets, but the suggestion that they evoke to the intuition which sees the thing itself. Combinations indicate tendencies, and that's all. And then he writes, as soon as I realized this, I had a vision. I saw a darkness which grew paler and paler and then started clearing up. At that moment, I saw written clearly across the clearing pallor 29 February 1956. It was just a flash. And at once, I noticed a golden ball shooting out from my heart region with a little sound. Before I could focus my eyes on the ball, it widened out and proceeded to spread in a golden area. The widening went on every second, a progression in waves. All the paling darkness was being devoured. Oh, where was I? I looked around. I had covered a journey equal to the distance from the ashram main gate to the ashram press, about a little more than half a mile. My experience had lasted about 5 minutes. I reached my office and was soon immersed in insurance files. It was months later that I came to hear of the supramental manifestation. Now, this was before 29th. On 29th February, and he didn't remember the date, he was working with some people, and this is the part which, unfortunately, I could not get in the scan. He says, right after 5:30, the whole sky, the sun was setting, suddenly the whole sky filled up with a golden light. And he felt the golden light descending. He felt as if a whole new world was being born. And for a while it continued. And he was convinced that something extraordinary had happened. And that was all. And more than a month later, this message which I have read out from the mother, after it was posted from Pondicherry, it reached him in Africa. And he understood the importance of this thing which he had seen. There's another incident narrated by one Bindre. He was a devotee from Karnataka. And he said he was alone and he witnessed a golden sunset. The ceiling fan was whirring at full speed. Suddenly, Bindre saw golden dust falling from the fan. Then he saw people ascending a mountain and this golden dust enveloping them. At the same time, he heard an immense downpour of sound. Later, he expressed this in a poem where he writes, "A sound as from 1,000-stringed instrument falls upon the earth like the descent of Ganga." His vision continued for some time. Later, it was reported to the mother. He is said to be one of those outside the ashram who had some extraordinary experience of those four. So I think we'll leave it at that. What did it mean? Mother explained later what descended was the supramental light, force, and consciousness, and now is a part of the evolutionary consciousness. It means whether we make the effort consciously or not, this force is active as a principle of evolution. Just as there had to be a point of transition where the mind consciousness descended and became an active force in evolution. But before that point, there was not an active influence of the mind. It was a passive influence. From the very fact that it's there, it acts like an attractor as an influence. But once it comes down and is established in the evolutionary consciousness, it acts on everything. So although human beings are the primary vehicle for the mental consciousness to be expressed in an organized way, its influence is there on all other animals, even on plants. And you will see, as a result of the human species emerging, other animals who are close enough in evolutionary terms beginning to be able to express some of the mental characteristics. And we mentioned the example of the dolphin earlier, but we have seen already so far in human experimentation with animals, about half a dozen animals who are able to express the character of self-awareness, the reflective character of awareness, that they can look in a mirror and know that it's themselves and not someone else. And this represents the ability to be able to stand back from oneself and observe one's own awareness. Elephants, some of the apes, chimpanzee and apes, I believe dolphins and a few others recently have been discovered to have similar character. But even within them, you will see a furthering of an evolution, often through human contact, especially through pet dogs, pet horses, sometimes pet cats, who have a strongly individualized consciousness. Through repeated contact with human beings, they develop characteristics of something of the rational mind, which is often so sophisticated that you can almost say they're thinking like us, only they can't speak like us. And often that's the precursor for them to be ready to take a human birth. In more recent times, we find human beings consciously trying to engage with the apes, teaching them sign language, communicating them in sophisticated ways. And all of this has an impact on the species consciousness and its evolution. I recently read of a research that they discovered for the first time certain monkey species beginning to use tools, which they've never done as a species before. And all of these are side effects of the mental consciousness being established as an evolutionary principle in the human being. An equivalent thing happens once the supramental consciousness is established as an evolutionary principle. Its first action in the higher parts of humanity, which is more awake, more conscious, more open and aspiring to things divine. But for the rest of humanity also, its effect begins to act. And one of the results will be a great amplification of the higher possibilities of the mind, a great opening to intuitive tendencies in the human consciousness. Where earlier intuition could happen once in a while, now you will find it happening more and more frequently. Where earlier synchronicity was occasional, now you will find synchronous events taking place more and more frequently. As an effect of the supramental influence, which being a power of harmony, unity underlying, brings things spontaneously in sync. And so it can happen, and especially if you're in a tuned state, attuned to the divine consciousness, you choose, you will something, you intend to do something, and as you begin to do your work, things just fall into place, click, 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 and it's done. And you wonder, I couldn't have done that. It could never happen even by chance, and yet it happened. And there are days when you're out of sync, and of course, everything is as if chaotic, nothing seems to move. And it has to do with your state of internal alignment. And so, the more we are conscious of that and consciously enter in alignment, the more easily these things seem to happen around us. But, and we will be exploring this a little more tomorrow, Sri Aurobindo describes how one of the effects of the supramental consciousness will be to accelerate human evolution, but also to accelerate all evolution. Not just accelerate, he says, a new principle has been introduced in evolution, which was not there before. So evolution itself will evolve. I'm quoting exactly. He says, evolution itself will evolve. What a statement. And it's something very new. No one has thought about it. No one has thought that evolution itself and its means can undergo an evolution. And imagine what that does for evolution itself. And he explains what that means. The principle of knowledge will take an increasingly more important place in evolution. Now, this can be understood on two levels. One, internally, I am conscious that I have a limitation and I consciously overcome it, which would be natural for any yogic method. But it also means in knowledge, I am able to intervene in evolutionary processes because of increasing knowledge and speed up those changes. And one of the forms in which this is being done today is through the knowledge of genetics, which is as if gifted to us by nature. Elsewhere, Sri Aurobindo explains that nature uses the individual human mind to act through the mind to create things, to create forms, to develop things which she will find much harder to do by natural processes. For example, the creation of a computer chip is made of sand, molten sand, purified molten sand, upon which you mix, they call it doping, you mix impurities and you arrange them in certain ways, and suddenly you have this unusual properties in a pattern which allows for expression of intelligence. Nature could do that. Long, slow, laborious process to pull one exemplar. But it's much more easy for nature to create the tools by which she can do it, and that's the human being with the human mind and the human hands. So nature has really formed us for her own objectives, not only as embodiments of mental consciousness, but also to do what she wants to do through us. And it's the human will, we don't realize it, which is influenced by nature, pushing us to do stuff. For example, 2000 years ago, all the necessary knowledge existed to create a steam engine. And yet nobody seemed to create it. In fact, they did make it, but they made it more like a toy. Here's something interesting. And about 300 years ago, the same technology, the same knowledge, suddenly the human mind said, hey, let's use this to industrialize, to mechanize, to make more effective, to get rid of slave labor. And the whole industrial revolution was born. Why is it that for 2000 years no one thought of doing it? They did, but they saw it as a curiosity. Everyone said, what's the point? Even if you remove slave labor, what's the point? But something in human consciousness wakes up and says, yes, there's a point to it, and we pursue it. It's nature pushing us from inside, and we are like little toys through which she acts. A few of humanity, though, a few of us, hopefully, are conscious enough that we feel this impulse, not only of nature, but of the divine will above. Who works through nature? Which works through nature in any case? The divine will directly awakens in our mind, in our hearts, a glimpse, a possibility, a vision, and inspires us now to work for it. Sometimes we say, I'm too far ahead of my time, I'm too crazy with my ideas. Yes, but you're meant to do that. And whether it succeeds or fails is secondary. It must be done. And even if I fail, my attempt prepares the way for somebody else to fulfill it. And you're inspired for a reason, because you're ready for it. You're the right person at the right time. And if you follow the inspiration, things fall into place and it happens. Not by your effort, but by that action, which works through you. And you become an instrument. And so in this new awakening of possibilities, the power of knowledge is now activated in evolution in a way that it can speed up evolution, including through means of genetic intervention. And it's a gift given, which we can of course misuse, and we will misuse as we have misused all things, but we will also use rightly as we proceed. And so Sri Aurobindo gives a very interesting description of all the kinds of changes which are inevitable with this development. But subsequently, where does it go to? Just as the substance of matter was taken up by life to make living matter, which is the tissue of plants, and then this substance of living matter was taken up by mind to make conscious living matter, which is the tissue of our body. So too now, a higher consciousness takes up this substance and makes it divinized, superconscious living matter. And so the culmination of this process is felt in the body's substance itself awakening to its divine potential. But that's the culmination. The first step is, of course, in the mind. The mind substance is infused with the supramental light, and the supramental way of knowledge, which we discussed yesterday briefly, begins to become more and more operationalized. The mind's tendency to laboriously think out through logic and rationality and still be unsure and still use logic to prove itself or to disprove itself and be always in doubt, that tendency begins to fade. The intuitive tendencies of a direct sight begins to act, but the intuition itself now opens out to still higher and more direct possibilities. And this will be the tendency in the human mind seen first, is being seen first. I intended to explore some of this tomorrow, but maybe I can touch upon it briefly and we will elaborate tomorrow. In the human species itself, there is an acceleration of evolution. You see, little children today are more conscious than we were at their age. They're able to pick up the laptops, tablets, phones, and start doing things which we couldn't figure out on our own, and they're barely at an age where they can speak. And that shows the mind itself has somehow become more awake. more capable, more perceptive, more intuitive. The genius potential, which we discussed yesterday, is naturally being increased in effortlessly. But at a biological level, also something is changing. Its first sign is part of the evolution which would take place after birth is now being squeezed into the womb. I'm going to give this a context. If you observe the fetus in the womb, it starts with a single cell, protozoa, becomes a cluster of cells, and then becomes like a tadpole, then becomes like a frog, then becomes like a cat or baby monkey, and then forms into the human. It's as if it's replicating the whole journey of evolution, squeezed down into 9 months, and then stuff after birth. But if you take it to logical conclusion, a lot of stuff which happens after birth would eventually get squeezed into before birth, right? Because that's the way the evolution is happening. So maybe the stuff that happens 1 year after birth could go back into the womb and take place right there. And three forms in which we see this. Children born today, as distinct from children born, let's say 30 or 40 years ago. Earlier they were born bald, mostly. Now more and more children are born with hair grown already. Earlier, soon after they were born, they were mostly eyes closed, and they would learn to open their eyes with great difficulty later. Now often at birth, they're out, eyes open, looking straight at you, connecting with eyes open, consciously connecting. And their hands, which will be closed, passive, now are active, moving, reaching out, as if they're in a hurry to grow up. I've seen so many children, especially in families which are more awake and conscious. The children are in the cradle, struggling to move. I want to get on with this. Body is coming in the way. I want to get on with walking, moving, doing my stuff. I'm here for work. Why is this body taking so long? There's an urgency, a sense of push like that. And it's happening automatically. We didn't do it. There's a pushing nature to speed up, to accelerate evolution. And where is this leading to? Mother makes a cryptic comment. She said, 300 years from now, I can assure you, the human body will be far more plastic than you can imagine today. How much can you imagine your body being plastic? I could do cartwheels, I could stretch my hands, twist. You've seen acrobats do stuff. We can imagine that. What is it that you can't imagine? That's as far as the human body can go in 300 years. And you have to do nothing about it. It's going to happen because of the working of the supramental force. Except we might say, I don't want to wait 300 years. How many lifetimes does that take? I want it now. And that's the difference between the unconscious yoga of nature and the conscious yoga that we take up. One of the effects will be also, and we will be discussing this tomorrow when we discuss Mother's work on the cellular consciousness, the aging process and the dying process also undergo radical changes. Aging necessarily being a falsehood of ignorance, of inconscience, necessarily must be overcome by a consciousness which is ever fresh, ever new, ever regenerating itself. And if the body is to be an expression of that consciousness, the body should be ever fresh, ever regenerating itself. Plasticity is the first condition in that direction. There's something else though, Mother says, very interesting. She says, the completion of this transformation of the physical, the mind transformation you can do in this lifetime, even the vital transformation you can do. But the physical transformation, she said, is going to take a little longer. I don't remember who it was to whom she said, 2 lifetimes perhaps. And then she, in one of the cryptic conversations, she says, there has to be a means found to be able to continue the consciousness across 1 or 2 births. Because otherwise you have to start all over again. With this dulling process, each time you take birth, you forget everything, lose everything, and then you kind of struggle to find yourself and overcome all this junk which comes from the environment, from the heredity and all that, just to get back to yourself. A bit messy. So much time lost. There has to be a way, she says, of continuity of consciousness into the next life, so that the work you have achieved now can continue exactly where you left off without having to struggle with all this. And so, yes.
That's the story behind the Dalai Lama.
So we have cases like this, but they are abnormal cases, they are exceptional cases, and I've narrated a story recently, bears repeating, it's so interesting. It was told to us by somebody who was his brother was in the border BRO, Border Roads Organization of India. So they were building roads in the Himalayan regions, and they were blasting rock to cut through the roads. And they told this almost 35 years ago. They cut through a portion, they blasted the rock, and then they found an opening, like a cave. So they peeked in and they heard some sound, and they were curious. So they went inside, and the sound grew louder, and they came to a person who was sitting cross-legged, chanting Om. Om. And he was all bone and skin, no flesh, dried out completely. And as they came in, they said, "Oh my God, we're disturbed some yogi." He opened his eyes. And so they began to apologize. They said, "We're sorry, we didn't know that you were here. We were just doing our job, cutting a road." And then he tells them, "Don't worry, anyway, it's my time has come. So can you please do me a favor?" His body is aged, shriveled up. He says, "My time has come. Do me a favor. Go down and cross that hill, and in the other valley there's a river. And when you reach there, you'll find a dead body of a young man. Cut a small piece of flesh from his right thigh and bring it to me." A weird request. So they said, "Okay, yogi, great yogi, we should not never question him." So they went, and as they reached that place, there was a body of a young man floating down, somebody who had died, drowned, we don't know what. They brought it out, cut a piece of flesh from the right thigh, and then brought it to him. And he said, "Thank you," put it in his mouth, and promptly died. What do you do? They closed the hole and went back. And as they reached the village, they said they were told by the villagers, around the same time that he popped it in his mouth, the young man over there got up and walked away. The piece of flesh was the link point for him to transfer his consciousness into the young body and move off. Very convenient. Very convenient for a yogi. Unfortunately, someone has to cut short his life to give you the body, but it's possible. And these are occult processes. Occult means they're not normal. What would be normal is you consciously choose. Gather your awareness and choose and make a conscious transition into the next life, involving either a period of rest or perhaps no period of rest, and make a conscious transition straight away into a new body. It's possible.
But when you have the next life, you are, you take birth in some form right away, right?
Mm-hmm. No need not be. There's a period of rest in between. There's a period of rest. Can be several years even. You don't take birth immediately always. Unless life is cut short by an accident, then your work is unfinished, you look for a quick birth. That's an exception. We'll be discussing this in greater detail. Yes, Alok wants to say something.
If we study this boy to see whether he carried the genes of consciousness of the yogi, because that would be interesting.
The fellow walked away.
That would be really.
The fellow walked away. But it's similar to this idea of the reincarnating lamas. They've reached a point where they can not only choose but communicate with somebody else where they have taken birth. But again, my point being, it should become a normal process for at least the developed parts of humanity. Yes.
Just to speak a little bit to Alokji's point, there are studies that have been done and books that have been published on, for example, organ transplants. Mm-hmm. And so Paul Pearsall, I think, wrote a book called The Heart's Code or something like that, where they have demonstrated with controlled studies that certain people will receive the organ, say a heart from another person, and they will have the memories and other things of that person's life.
Yes. There's very interesting work in this kind of transfer of consciousness or imprints of memory with cockroaches. They taught a group of cockroaches to navigate a maze. Then they cut off the head of the cockroach and joined the body of the cockroach with another to share the blood. And the new set of cockroaches now had the full memory of the recovery, the maze. So just by a blood transfusion, memories of consciousness embedded in the physical consciousness can be transferred. So there's a lot to say. That's why, from a yogic perspective, organ donation, blood donation, etc., need to be understood differently. We don't need to discuss that now. But yes.
Now, on the same subject, would you please relate or fit into this modern science of medical genetics, talking about cloning the bodies?
Yes, yes. So body clone is not such a big deal. It's no different from twins which are genetically identical. It does not mean the consciousness is the same. It's just the biological base which is the same. It's only when the soul may share two bodies in rare occasions, and the twins are literally inseparable because it's actually one person in two bodies. But other than that, the genetic identity does not lead to much by itself.
May I ask you one thing? What is it about brain dead? Person is brain dead, his organs are working, the doctors are saying, okay, we're going to keep him under whatever, and then take his organs out and then transplant them. So what are they really doing with his consciousness? Or when they say brain dead, what does that mean?
The problem with brain dead patients is you are seeing only the biology and not the consciousness inside. Fortunately, in the latest tools, we are able to watch the brain working internally, and we are able to distinguish when there is a response of consciousness and when there is not. In the brain working, but not in the rest of the biology. So let me elaborate. Through a certain fMRI scan, you ask the patient a question, and there's a ripple effect in the brain. He wants to reply but cannot. Remember, I mentioned yesterday there's some patients who came out of coma with full memory, and some, of course, never coming out, or some coming out with no memory, etc. They just represent different degrees of separation of the inhabiting consciousness from the biological power of expression. Degrees of separation. But if the degree of separation is not too great, then in the brain one can see the responsiveness that the person is thinking, attempting to communicate. That can be caught. And those patients, at least we know we could get them out potentially. But there are others where there's no response at all, and we would say perhaps the consciousness is not there. Now this is medically. From a spiritual perspective, the question is much simpler. Somebody with an awakened sight can see and tell you if the soul is there or gone. In some cases, the soul has left, only the machinery of the body continues by habit. In other cases, the soul chooses to stay on for a purpose of a certain experience, and it may continue all through for sometimes decades, 20, 30 years. And one day suddenly it may wake up and say, okay, enough, and poof, it wakes up. So there's one case, for example, where this person in coma, I think it was the family members decided, okay, if he does not wake up, tomorrow we proceed with disconnecting the machine and, well, shutting him down. And the next day the fellow woke up. So they said it to the person, look, if you don't wake up, we're going to do this. And he woke up. So the consciousness inside has the power also. It can be in a kind of a stupor, waiting and surprised and watching this. Oh, it's interesting. Or we say, okay, it's enough, pushes forward and breaks through. So all of these are possible. There's no one set rule, and it needs a deeper insight to be able to see what's really happening there.
But it's so sad because so often that we have seen recently, somebody dies and then they declare them dead, and and they're not sure, and
You cannot be sure just by looking.
No, but even the doctors, for example, if they're doing MRI or not doing the MRI. So, I mean, how does a person decide?
Yes, you cannot, unless you have an insight. So we'll come back to the topic. The question of continuity of consciousness, necessary to complete this process of the yoga, of the sadhana, which would bring it all the way to a material transformation. And Mother speaks of the necessity for developing this capacity of continuity of consciousness. Now, what is interesting is more and more of this is happening spontaneously today. Children are being born who carry much more of their past content of developmental consciousness, and you can see it at a very young age. Unfortunately, many of them tend to lose it when the mental part of the consciousness, at the beginning of 10, 11, 12, that begins to cloud and cover. But if early on we get them to be conscious of that inner reality, it's possible for them to grow fully. Or maybe the soul chooses to allow this clouding for the purpose of a certain development and then rips it open and comes forward again. But this is increasingly happening. I know of a case, for example, of a lady who remembers distinctly as a baby being in somebody's arms and the lady standing next to her wearing a particular hat and dress. And she's thinking, why don't this person move and block the sun which is coming in my eyes? Now she remembers this, and when she told this to her parents, they said, it's not possible. You were 15 days old when that event took place. Now it shows you that it's possible for the consciousness within to be awake enough, even the biology is incapable of expressing. But generally, there's a tendency for stupor and loss of continuity. So there's a need for this to be developed, and we will be discussing this in greater detail this afternoon session. And one particular example of Dina Miriam will be sharing her experiences with us of how her memories came back at a certain age and what it means when you have this sense of continuity across lives. It changes your whole perspective. But it already requires a certain level of development that you're able to let go of the past. The reason why nature blocks memories is because we don't want the junk from the past to come up. Past hatreds, angers, habits, obsessions, addictions, all of these can pop back with the memory. And you want to start fresh, you want a different personality, a different experience. So there has to be a certain maturity of the soul and readiness that can allow for a continuity and even perhaps a selective continuity, that your purpose is fulfilled, but you are not stuck with. But this is tending to happen more and more. And I'm looking at these more as effects of the action of the supramental consciousness. We will look at other effects, social, political, technological, economic, etc., in detail tomorrow because that's the theme. But I just want to conclude by showing how what happened in 1956 is a decisive turning point. And it has set the whole evolution into a new direction and a new form where evolution itself has evolved and is evolving, bringing in this dimension of knowledge and conscious awareness into itself more and more completely, leading not only to change in the mind and life, but even in the physical consciousness. Mother spoke of the change in the body and in the weather patterns as the first sign that the supermind is working in the physical consciousness. But I will be discussing this tomorrow, so I'll put it back now. And it's ironic, perhaps, that the Divine chose this day, 29th February, which does not happen every year. It happens once in 4 years. Strange, ironic. But the Mother declared, henceforth, this will be the day of the Lord. So we continue to observe it that way. More of Mother's work on the cells and the effects of the supermind is for tomorrow. And I'll pause here. Maybe any questions we can take up.
Here's a question from a 9-year-old child. He said, why do we have to die? Why can't we live forever?
Absolutely. You should tell him. So the question from the 9-year-old child, why do we have to die? Why can't we live forever? And you should say, yes, we don't have to die. We have to die because our body cannot keep up with the progress of our consciousness. The body is not capable of keeping up, therefore eventually we have to shed it. We don't die. We shed the body and take up another body so that we can continue to grow and live. Okay? So first correction, we never die. Only the body is dropped. Like old clothes. As you grow, 9-year-old, he knows this. As you grow, your shirt becomes too tight. Right? At some point, if you continue to wear it, it starts ripping, it starts breaking. It can't keep up with your growth. So you drop the shirt and take a new shirt. And that's what we do with our body. But eventually, if we can make the body plastic enough that it can grow with us, it can express our consciousness at each moment more and more transparently, we don't need even to drop the body because the body will get reshaped to match our consciousness as we grow.
Always wonder,
Death is a falsehood, and this must be emphasized right from the beginning. Yes.
wondered for years that the mechanism of death has been created, seems to me, kind of makes sense to me, because if you have this sense of urgency that you have only so much time, the moment you realize you have infinite time, I don't know how much we do, how many of us will do all this.
But do we have to do it all?
Hmm.
Why do we have to do it so much?
Well, some of us feel it. I can't speak for everybody.
Didn't we say yesterday that?
When you observe a child,
The best way?
when you observe a child, you will never find the child wasting time. The child is always eager to grow. And he remains young as long as he is eager to grow. The adult becomes old when you stop being interested in growth. Aging begins when you stop growing. Okay? And this is the point the mother makes. I have seen young people of 80 and old people of 18. So this impulse to grow is not something you decide because of external stimuli or attractions or repulsions. It is innate to the soul and its sense of purpose in
Yet when we grow up, we are always working within deadlines. We find it very difficult to work.
that these are all mental constructions which block the natural flow of the soul's fulfillment.
Exactly.
And that's why you went through that process of discarding so many period things which you got trained into because they didn't align with the soul's aspiration. If you had got sucked into them, you would be dead. Psychologically, you would not be growing, you'd be bored, you'd be tired, you'd be fed up, you'd hate what you're doing because you're not growing in the direction of your swabhava and swadharma, the innate aspiration of your soul. Yes.
Well, I think what you just said, I think as you get older, you can still change. I'm 80, over 80, I'm here. And I have totally changed in the last 5 years since I come here. So you could change, you could become whatever. And of course, some of it is your fault. I listen to you. But,
We had-
you can be like a child and want to do more and more and more and live to the fullest. You can do it.
Absolutely, absolutely.
You can.
The head of engineering in the ashram, at the age of 85, computers were just coming in and he began to learn computers and programming. And then he found at some point, he said, a tendency for dulling of the mind, kind of a dementia was beginning to set. And with a vengeance, he forced himself to learn new things and overcame that. He continued to drive a car until almost he was 95. He had to stop driving because it was dangerous for others.
I don't understand everything. I mean, you do lose a little bit. I have to be.
Yes, the biology breaks down, the psychology need not. Yes. Yes.
Just to add to this, we spoke about Barbara Marx Hubbard yesterday. Barbara Marx Hubbard is an 86-year-old visionary who is so young, it's amazing.
Mhm.
And so she's coined this term that she likes to share with others called teleoros. Teleos, meaning, that which gives you purpose and meaning, and eros, which is the creative divine force. So she says basically when you can put those two things together, you find your meaning and purpose, and you pair it with, your divine creative energy, you'll forever stay young. It makes a lot of sense. So,
Yes.
yeah, she's great.
In fact, for the soul, the sense of eternity is constant. It knows it has eternity ahead. And that's why it can wander through lives sometimes, experiencing things, taking up an entire lifetime just for one particular specific kind of experience before it moves back to its larger evolutionary purposes. You have eternity ahead. It does not prevent you from growing because that's innate character of the soul's consciousness. So we can perhaps stop now. There was a request for some meditations, but I'm not sure if we have time this evening. Would you like to do that now or?
Yeah, we got 10 minutes, 15 minutes.
10 15?
How much time you need?
I don't know. Maybe 20 minutes. Yesterday we took 20 minutes. I don't know.
So you have 20 minutes. Go ahead.
You was crowded in the beginning, right?
There are several different directions in which our consciousness can open to the divine. We mentioned two principally yesterday: opening deeper than the heart to the psychic presence, opening above the head into the higher ranges, wider and higher consciousness. There's another, which is to step back, step out of this domain of forms. And and again, there are many entry points, many gateways through which one can do that. We will take up one of them, which is through the hearing. And so for a while, we'll close our eyes. Take a slow, deep breath. And as you breathe out, relax your body, relax your mind, and let all the worries of the world fade away from you. Becoming conscious of your hearing, listen. Listen to all the sounds around you. The breathing of people, the sounds of air conditioning perhaps, things in the room, things faintly outside the room perhaps. And notice that behind all these sounds, behind all this is a silence. Listen to the silence. Turn all your attention to the silence behind all sounds. And notice the silence itself is wide, vast. Behind all sounds in the room, behind all sounds outside the room, reaching out into a distance. And listen to the silence as it extends into the distance. Let your awareness drift into that wide silence, merge into that wide silence that supports from behind all sounds of the world. Let all your awareness gently lean back into that silence, losing yourself in its wideness. Let all form and world fade away from you as you merge into that silence, vast, infinite. And let all your sense of separateness dissolve into that silence so that only its vastness, its stillness remains infinite, eternal. Let yourself gently drift deeper into this oceanic silence, as if drifting deeper and deeper into an ocean of silence, sinking into its depths. And as you sink deeper into this silence, you let yourself merge into it, dissolve into it, lose all sense of separateness. And as you dissolve into it, you sink deeper and deeper into the most profound depths of silence. All the world fades into the distance as you enter this deep, dense silence, sinking deeper and deeper into it. Sinking deeper and deeper into its permanence, sinking into the silence. Until all sense of time and space fade away, all sense of forms fade away. There is only silence. And let yourself dissolve into that. Remain immersed in that. Gently from deep within the silence, you prepare yourself to drift upwards once again towards the domain of time, space, and forms and world. And gently, like a bubble slowly drifting upwards, let your awareness drift towards the direction of space, time, and form, still surrounded by silence, but drifting towards form, world, and activity. Till you feel yourself once again aware of things of the world, things of space and time and form. But briefly now you turn back, drift back, turn inwards, and plunge deep once again into the silence, leaving behind the world of space and time and form. Plunging rapidly, deeply into the silence, into its depths. Drift back, sink deep, deep, deep. Coming back to rest in the depth of the silence, in the depth of the ocean, formless, spaceless, silence. Remain immersed in that. Now, once again, very gradually, let your awareness drift upwards like a bubble, slowly rising, surrounded by a deep silence, gently drifting upwards, outwards, towards the surface of this ocean, towards the domain of space, time, form, world. Gently drifting, emerging slowly from the depth of silence, becoming conscious of things of the world, becoming conscious of the form of your body, becoming conscious of the sounds that play on the surface of the silence, but conscious also of the silence behind the forms, deep, oceanic. Remain for a while in this halfway state where you're conscious of both equally. The things of the world seem so fickle, so trivial, so transitory against this permanence of the silence. But now gently we enter the domain of life, the domain of form, the things of the world. But we will keep the backdrop of this silence as our support, as our foundation. And gently we become conscious once again of the form of our body, the sensations of our skin, of our limbs, the sounds around, the hiss of the air conditioner. And gently let your awareness settle once again in awareness of body, mind, sensations, senses. Perhaps you feel still the silence like a backdrop, a vast backdrop supporting the whole universe, supporting you and your little bubble of personality. And try to retain this awareness even afterwards. You will find you only need to close your eyes to feel it once again because it is always there, behind you, behind all things. And for now, gently, we let our eyes open. And with our eyes open, remain conscious of the intense silence surrounding, supporting from behind all things. You may remain for a while with eyes open or closed as you like. And whenever you feel yourself ready, you can get up and leave quietly without disturbing others. As an experience, it is very different from yesterday. It is more an aspect of the negation of forms, standing behind, free of all forms, all limitations. Whereas yesterday's was more the power of the peace, the force and concreteness of the peace, affirming. This is as if standing back in freedom, denying limitation of form. And these are two complementary experiences. Both are powers of the self. One is peace of the self, the other is silence of the self. And the entry into the silence of the self is more naturally leading to a nirvanic kind of experience, where the world itself becomes irrelevant. And perhaps you felt briefly how one could stay in that without bothering about anything. When the peace affirms the self and its influence in the world, and manifests the power and the knowledge and even the delight of the self. One frees you, liberates you, the other empowers you to manifest. Both are complementary experiences.